Oh, very good.
Oh.
He can dish it back.
Well, he can.
Well. Okay, so I guess I am going to have a PowerPoint, a little bit of one up here for you. I'll get it eventually where I put it on that thing, because that thing's a lot better. So, from Israel, where are you from? What city?
Yaffo. The fish city. You know Jonah and the fish and them? What happened?
Joppa.
Oh, Joppa. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I've been there.
We call it fish city because that's where most of
Have
the
you been?
fish comes.
Is that where Akko is now?
No, it's not.
That's Akko. Yeah, it was Akkor, I guess, wasn't it? Tel Aviv. I love it. I love it over there. Oh, yeah. You want to go? Let's go. Let's go again.
Okay.
Let's go next year.
Next year?
Yeah, let's just go.
Okay.
Let's just make it next summer. We
I'm
got.
alive, you're alive, and we're alive.
Let's go. Logan's scared to death of flying, and there's no better flight to break that fear on than about 12 hours over the ocean, right? I think it'd be perfect. Let's just go. Everybody can go. Yeah. No, they always go in, the fall and spring. They never go in the winter when I could use some snow days to not have to miss school. All these tour companies, they always go a little early. But anyway, if you can go. It'll change your life. It will change your life. 5 days over there is worth 5 years of Sunday school, guaranteed. I'm going to try next week. We've got the walk-through, drive-through. Is it a walk-through?
It's a walk.
Walk-through presentation of the life of Christ. So I'm going to try to wrap this part of what I'm doing up and maybe move on to something else. We may get to it. We may not. Who knows? We may get there. Anyway, we'll start on the New Testament tonight. We'll go ahead and bring up that first slide if you want to. We'll get there in just a minute. Favorite New Testament verse? Who's got it? Passage, verse. Passage or verse. Passage and verse.
1 Thessalonians 4.
1 Thessalonians 4. How come?
It's just the second coming is just there.
Second coming's there. I love the second coming.
I'm looking forward.
I get a crown for loving the second coming. I may never see it while I'm alive in this body, but Paul says there's a crown waiting for him because he loved the coming of the Lord, the appearing of the Lord. Anybody else read the Old Testament or the New Testament? Just checking. Just checking. Tom got all the discussion out of y'all already, I guess, didn't he?
Oh, there's plenty more left, brother.
Oh, come on. Favorite New Testament passage, verse.
Mark 10:27b. With man it is impossible, not with God, for with God all things are possible.
With God, all things are possible. Does that include, something that pertains to you? Sure does. You're the center of his attention. We all are. I love 1 Thessalonians 1. I guess it's verses 9 and 10. He gives the evidence of what we're supposed to be in the end of that. The evidence, turning from God, or turning to God from your idols, serving the Lord, and waiting for His coming.
That's right.
Can't wait. The New Testament is phenomenal. I love the Old Testament. I love the Old Testament. But don't we need both?
Yes.
How do we know we need both?
Because he's got them both.
Isn't
Both of
all...
them's in here.
What's that?
Both of them's in here.
Both of them's in there? Isn't all Scripture
By inspiration.
given by inspiration profitable for anything in this world that we need? I do believe in one interpretation, many applications. There are things we learn from any of the narrative, the way the Old Testament is written like a narrative. There's so much to learn from that. To the practical living of the Old Testament, or to the Psalms and the Proverbs, we have a practical living book here, the general epistles. Practical Christian living that we get in the New Testament. What is the focus of the Old Testament? The coming of the Messiah. What is the focus of the New Testament? The return and salvation. salvation is the central message of the Old Testament. Tom tried to trick me this morning. 20. Yeah, he told me the wrong number of books to begin with. And I told him the wrong number back. So, yeah. Oldest book in the Old Testament. Around about, probably. Job. First book written in the New Testament. I see, that's why I love doing this, because it gives us a... I was thinking last night, I'll put it this way. We went to the courtesy of a fantastic gift. Logan and I went and watched the Tennessee get beat again last night. When we left, we were up, 6?
3, I think.
No, we were up 6 when we left. Weren't we?
No, we were up 16-13.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Anyway, we were up. But the first part of the game is fantastic, because that's when I like to be at an event, because that's when you get to see all the behind-the-scenes stuff that you don't get to see. It's almost more fun to watch that than it is the actual game. When you go to a NASCAR race, I love to sit and watch the flag man. You know, you never get to see that much on TV. You don't get to watch all the little intricacies, and you listen on the headset and how the flyover and the national anthem, everything is timed down to the second. I mean, it's in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it goes just like it's supposed to. But when they do that tee, and the people run out through the tee, it's not even the run out that I like, or the noise beyond belief when everybody's screaming. It's been about 15 years since I've been to a game, so I had forgotten that. When you watch those people, all those individual people, all working together to make that tee, form that tee, and everything to work perfectly. Imagine the work that went into planning that. Planning it, creating it, making sure it, flows flawlessly every single time that they do that. Every home game for years. And it's probably done in a way that if somebody did mess up, you probably wouldn't even know. But the person that designed it would. All that went in just for what? How long does that last? 20 seconds? 30 seconds for that? Imagine everything that went in to this book. First book being written around 1500 BC, 1400 BC. The last book probably written somewhere near 100 AD. And it all flows. It's all written by all different men, different backgrounds, some simple men, some educated men, some professionals, some shepherds, from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high. Everything that went into putting this book together, there has to be something supernatural behind it. Because guess what? There are no mess-ups.
That's right.
In all those years, there's not one mess-up. Not one contradiction, not one word out of place, not one mess-up. And that takes, Vanessa, like you said, that is God. That is a miracle. I'll before I go any further, I can't get away with saying that, or get away from saying this. I usually don't talk right there because I get my time. I get time to say things. We were talking about seeing God in somebody's life. I'll put it this way: it's Mom's birthday week, and she died 7 days after her birthday, and you can't dwell on it. You can't dwell on it. You have to move on, but you can remember the things. But one of the best things, if there was a good thing about it, I believe it was the grace God showed her. Can you imagine praying that you would not be incapacitated? That was her biggest fear, being incapacitated for a long period of time. Maybe 14, 15 hours is all it was. And that's God. I believe answering her own prayers in that way. But anyway, I wanted to say that. But looking at this chart here, I don't know if you can see it. I need to print some of these off like I did the Old Testaments. It's a breakdown of the books. I love this. I've loved studying this. It's opened my eyes a little bit. I hope it does for you. Looking at the New Testament, the theme is salvation. Salvation in times of life, when life was hard. Life was hard for first century Christians. The times were bad. You know, you come up from baptism, you could be killed right then, depending on who you were. All the disciples were martyred, except John. And now that's, you know, he told them, you're going to have to carry your cross for me. It's going to be a hard thing to bear, but the rewards are unbelievable. And they're still gaining rewards, these men, for all the work that they did here. So let's take a look at the Old Testament. Broken down into the history. You have I feel kind of you speak on the Old Testament, you have someone who's probably, absolutely knowledgeable and fluent in it. You got the 5 divisions. Here we've got the 3. You got history, letters, and prophecy. How many books we got in prophecy there? You can see 1, the Revelation. The others, the history, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. That would be the history. One of the things that I think is amazing is, when you look in the Old Testament, you go all the way through basically Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And you have the history of the Old Testament right there. And then all those prophets and all those books and everything that come later, you plug them back in. That's the same way it is with the New Testament. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the book of Acts. And all this is happening within that one book. Most of it. At least all of Paul's part is happening all during the period of the Acts. We read Acts, people that don't have a lot of deep Bible knowledge, deep Bible teaching for years and years and years. You get kind of bogged down. You read Acts and then you think it ends and then you think the life of Paul starts. But it's all back in there. And it's so rewarding to go back through there and see how Paul was doing and feeling when he's writing all these words, all these letters to these different people. And we can see where he was. I don't know if you still have that chronological... I think I have one up here. That chronological reading plan. And when you look in the New Testament, it has, Acts starting fairly well on. And then you go through Acts 1 through Acts 14. Then you get the book of James. It throws the book of James in there. When we find James toward the end of the New Testament. James, then we get Acts 15 and 16. And that's where we begin to see Paul writing the book of Galatians. Acts 17, you read that. And then we go and during that time of Acts 17, he's writing 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So you go back through the book of Acts and you can see what all's going on. Hey! I like it. History, letters, prophecy. History, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. And then, I love the way this breaks it down. And I've got several of these. One of them you're going to see is actually 1 page, but because it didn't look very good in 1 page, I split it into 3 pages. So we have the early books, the early letters, the early epistles. Here they're Galatians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Romans. These are written during Paul's missionary journeys. And I think, I know I have. Sometimes you run across something and you have to, what is it you count? Maybe a correction, or maybe not a correction, but you throw anyway. When I did the lesson on 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, I have read and had read and studied that was the first letter. I have it in notes in Bibles that it's the first letter. I think when you study this, you will see that it could be 1 Thessalonians or Galatians, Paul's first letter, depending on when he wrote it. So you might see some commentaries say that Galatians was the first. You may see some say 1 Thessalonians was the first of Paul's letters. But that's because it's hard to determine that exact date because they were so close together. I just wanted to throw that out there in case you remembered that and said, well, you said last time that it was 1 Thessalonians. So these are our early epistles. These are our what? What do we have right here? The prison epistles. You have Colossians, Ephesians, Philemon, and Philippians. The prison epistles, where he was in bondage. I'm just not going to feel like I don't know. It may come to us one day being in chains. Could be. Can you imagine being so close and in such a spirit that you write life-changing material, eternity-changing material while you're in prison? Are we there? If we go to jail tomorrow for our faith, are we there? Then we have his release, 1 Timothy and Titus, and then the second imprisonment. I love reading 2 Timothy because I believe Paul is pouring out his heart. He knows what it must be like to be at that point where you know you're close. You know that through whatever revelation he had, he knew that this was the end for him. And he's pouring out all he can to make sure this keeps going. And you'll see what I'm talking about, the continuation of the church, in just a little bit. Then you have the general epistles. James, Hebrews, Jude, 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. Why would they call them general? What do you think? Anybody got an idea about that? That's kind of the heading they fall under. It's kind of like we say major and minor prophets. And the language is kind of like, well, these are really important and these are just a little bit important. That's kind of the language that we get. But major and minor based on the length of book. Probably. Why would we call them general epistles? Well, what do you find at the Dollar General?
Everything.
A little bit of everything. Except SOS pads. I bet I spent 15 minutes looking the other night at SOS pads. No. They had to find them for me. Now, that's not a stretch. It's hard for me to find things. I think I did it as a kid so they wouldn't have me go look for things. I'd just say, I can't find it. But SOS pads in Dollar General, just go to Walmart. But the general store, you have a little bit of everything. General epistles. These epistles right here, aside from the Hebrews, that's to a particular group of people. These are all to what? These are all to Christians, but they're in their particular churches. Particular churches. These are general, practical Christian living. And then, of course, we have the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, what is amazing about the New Testament? The organization and the gathering of the New Testament is a far cry different than what the Old Testament was. Almost in the Old Testament, you had people, as something's being written, you've got somebody there ready to kind of take it. It was more readily available. It was, especially when you look at the Torah, the first 5 books, Moses wrote those, and it was there. You know, they didn't spend hundreds of years searching for all the different pieces and piecing it together. As they were written, under of course, the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, people began putting these together. The Old Testament was written over a period of, 1,400 years, or 1,000 years or so, if you don't count the last 400 years, the silent period. But they were there. They were readily available. When you get this, you have letters everywhere, all over Europe. There wasn't a printing press. There wasn't mass distribution of these letters. Paul wrote a letter and sent it to these churches. And it took 300 years, nearly 400 years, to put all this together. Anybody ever studied the councils of Carthage? There were several of them, but it took till 397 to put these together and determine which ones they felt were inspired, which ones were true, which ones... all that goes into doing that. It took them that long just to put them all together in the Bible we had. Now, when they were talking about reading the Bible and studying the Bible, when it talks about the Bereans in Acts, I think it's 17, they studied the Word, right, Bill? When Paul would preach something, they searched the Scriptures. What Scriptures did they search? They didn't have the New Testament yet. How much more blessed we are to have all this. They searched it out and received it. The Bible says they received it basically readily. They were anxious. They were hungry for it. They wanted the Word, and they were excited about what Paul was teaching. And they went back and checked to see if it was true. So we have all these different letters going everywhere. And they finally get brought together. We know that when the people in the early church studied the Scriptures, they were studying the Old Testament, verifying what Paul was saying by using the Old Testament. And then Paul begins to write letters. But does anybody know the first one we were talking about just a few minutes ago? The first probably book in the Old Testament that was written. Let's go to the New Testament. New Testament. Anybody know? From what I was reading, it's kind of one you wouldn't think. I would have thought the Gospels. James. Matthew, what was your line in the play? Not the whole thing. But
You got 18 minutes?
go from, when the music started, you're going from, start in
Oh, Jerusalem.
Jerusalem,
And then to Samaria.
and then
Judea.
to all the world.
The whole world.
Did you realize that even the letters of the New Testament took that route? Who was James? Where was he stationed?
Brother Jesus.
He was stationed in Jerusalem. And the first? Can we go 2 slides? 2 slides. You start here. James, around 45 BC. Now that tells me, AD. I'm getting all confused. I teach AC. I teach AD and BCE and everything in school, so I get them all mixed up. I'll get it there. So we have James in around 45 AD. Now what does that tell you? What can you infer from that? We have Christ crucified when? Around 30 AD. And we don't have the first New Testament scripture written for 12, 15 years. Does that surprise anybody? That surprised me. I looked at that and thought, wow. So the church is experiencing this boom and this growth. Can you imagine the influence of the Holy Spirit moving people through these men? What happens if these men don't go and write and preach? They didn't have the Word yet. For those first 12, 15 years, they didn't have a New Testament to go by, to explain all this stuff to them. They didn't have the 4 Gospels. And that is incredible. That's why God put the blessings on those apostles that He did. That's why we had to have a miraculous jump start to the church. And what a jump start it was. So then we go here. You have Galatians, quite possibly Mark, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Romans, and then down here Matthew, Luke, and Acts. Probably pretty close to the order. You'll see some are very close in date. And I don't claim that anybody has all the exact correct dates. It's kind of a guessing game to get them exactly. But this is all about the beginning and the founding of the church. This is where it all begins. And Paul and the writers of the Gospels and Luke writing the book of Acts, this is when all this starts, from 45 to 61. It took 1,400 years to get all the Old Testament together. Here we have a good portion of the New Testament in just 15 years. In just 15 years, how God was moving in those men. They changed the world in a very short period of time. Let's go to the next one there, Dave. Then we have from 61 to 68. The 4 prison epistles. Paul's in prison there, writing those while he's in prison in Rome. What do we call 1 Timothy, Titus, and 2 Timothy? The pastoral epistles right there. He's writing them to the young preachers coming up. He's saying he's given them the organization of the New Testament church. He's given them all the things, the doctrine, all the things they need to make sure this runs how God wants it to run. It's all right there. But for 30 years, they didn't have all this. To me, that would be scary. That'd be scary to think back and living in those days. Knowing what we know today, it's so readily available. It's right here. At any time, I can bring it up anywhere I am. I can bring up the Bible. Can you imagine how they longed for the Word in those days? They longed for it. Let's go. This was the establishing the church. And let's go to the other one, the very last one. And here we go. We have John, the disciple that Jesus loved. The disciple that Jesus loved, John. I don't know why God made it or had him wait till, possibly 85, 90 AD to start writing his words. That's not for us to find out, but I am sure glad that he got to write them. I am sure glad. There is so much hope found in John. The book of John, the Gospel of John, how it's changed the world. How John 3:16 has changed lives. They didn't have it for the first 50 years of the church. I wonder if that was a verse that I wonder when they finally broke it down. I'd like to research that, when that really came about. I wonder if they focused on that like we do. Makes you wonder. Then the Revelation. Here, all these are John's legacy, and it is to ensure that the church is continuing on, because here we go. This is it. This is the last that you get. Divinely inspired word. This is it. We have it. It is complete. Tom said, we were talking about, the interpretation of dreams and things like that, and God sending obscure messages. There's no need to send obscure messages anymore. There's no more revelation needed. We have everything that we need right here. The Old Testament compared to the New Testament. Look at that. But the whole thing together, it's life. It is the book of life. I'm not saying it's the book of life in heaven, but it's the book of our life. This is where we hear what we have to hear. One more thing, and I'm going to close. I actually skipped over this book. Like I said, I just wanted you to get a quick overview of how it's organized. It's organized from, of course, the Gospels, and then Acts, and then in the order of the length of the book, and the epistles all the way up to Revelation. Go back to slide 2. This is probably my most favorite slide in all this, because I like this stuff right here. I don't know if you can see this well or not, but we said to Jerusalem, and Judea, then to Samaria, and then to what? The uttermost parts of the earth. Who did God choose for that honor? Who? I heard it. Paul. He chose Paul to get it out to the uttermost parts. And this is what he did. Look at all this. You have this. I like this graphic. It's pretty neat. This is your first missionary journey, second missionary journey, third missionary journey. And at first I got to looking at it and I was going, he didn't have another first missionary journey and another second missionary journey. But if you can see the bars in there, what's that? His first imprisonment and his second imprisonment. We have an approximate timeline right there. And then down here, I love charts that do this. It puts it for us right there. The book of Galatians probably wrote in the first missionary journey. And we can go back and we read that in the book of Acts, and then we can go read Galatians and know and get the whole picture of what's going on right there in that moment. Instead of taking it, one book at a time, when you get a good picture of what's going on, man, it brings the Bible alive. Second missionary journey, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. Man, that was a hard one for him. He was getting run out of town. He was having a hard time. He'd get run out of this town. He would have a hard time in Corinth or wherever. And he really wants to go back to Thessalonica, and he writes them. And he sends people back there. Then you get the third missionary journey, and then his imprisonments and his release. We can probably just about bet that Paul died before 70 AD. There's never any mention in his writings of the temple being destroyed. That happened in 70 AD. So this is probably a pretty pretty accurate timeline right there, about 68, 69, when he was martyred. He was martyred. He gave all he had. Think about it. I want you to think about what has gone into this book. The arrangement of it, people studying it. The boys will ask me a question sometimes. I mean, a random question while I'm driving. Or, well, why is this way? And, well, let me look it up while I'm driving. Let me look it up, Let me look it up. And then I'm like, you have a smartphone. Look it up. I want to teach them, and we all need to be this way, not to always, don't just depend on me. Or him. Or Bill, or whoever your Sunday school teacher is, or Carolyn. Don't just depend on one person to give you what you need, what you want to hear, because there is so much. That's one reason people get mad in church. Well, he don't ever talk about what I want to hear about. Well, there's a lot in here. There's a lot in here. It may take a while before you get back around to prophecy, one of these days. But do it. Get in here, read the Word, just like James says. Don't just be hearers of the Word, be doers of it. And how do we be doers of it? How do we be doers? How do we become doers of it? We have to read it ourselves. Get in here. Learn this book. I tell my kids at school, is Madeline in here? Yeah, she did it. I make my kids at school still to this day memorize their multiplication tables. Now, they're in 6th grade. It's just the way the world is these days, all over the place. I feel like they ought to know them by now. But I tell them, you have 2 minutes. That's all you get, isn't it, Madeline? 2 minutes.
Yeah.
To do what?
To say your 2s through your 9s in 2 minutes.
My goodness. Can you do that?
Oh, yeah.
Can you do that?
Yeah. 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 5 is 10, 2 times 6 is 12, 2 times 7 is 14, 2 times 8 is 16, 2 times 9 is 18. Yeah. You got to know it. And they'll go, I can't do it. I can't. It's too hard. And I say, you can learn a song that's 2 minutes long with 400 words in it if you want to bad enough. And guess what they do, guys? They end up saying it. They do something they didn't think they could do. They can't do it unless you know it. You cannot be a doer of that unless you know it. And we can't be doers of the Word unless we know it. Know it. Immerse yourself in it. We can learn anything we want. We spend a lot of time learning a lot of other things that probably ain't going to matter. No, not probably. That won't matter in this life. But this will. Let's learn it. Let's learn it. Let's learn all we can about it. And use it. And be doers of the Word. Anybody got anything?
I really like your charts. I guess I didn't really realize that Paul wrote Ephesians while he was in prison. I guess that just kind of slipped me. That's one of my favorite books. It has such beautiful language in it for Christians. And he also talks about, he refers to himself as a prisoner of Jesus Christ. So, and he maybe that in other places, but I really specifically remember it in Ephesians. So I think that's really interesting. I had never clicked with me that he wrote that while he was in prison.
And Ephesians chapter 1, I don't know if you've ever heard the song, but it's one of them fast songs by Karen Peck. It's called Ephesians chapter 1. And he's in prison, and he says, I'm blessed. I'm chosen. Adopted, forgiven. There's all kinds of adjectives in there that he describes himself that we would not describe someone who is in prison.
Some of the most beautiful verses, like if you just sit down and read it, it's not a very long book. You just sit down and read some of those beautiful language and verses, and they come out of prison. So.
And I thank God for people who put these together, for who study it and find it. And it's there for you to search out.
That's a good chart.
I like that chart. I like the part too, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. It's biblical. It's biblical. Anybody else got anything? I'm working on where I'm going next. I'm not quite sure. I think I know, but we'll see.
I bet you don't.
Or y'all may say turn it back over to him. I don't know, but I wanted to finish this up and kind of give you just an overview of its organization. Not necessarily the history of all the printing and stuff, but just to say there's more there than just turning to it and reading it. There's so much more, and it makes it so much richer when we can place things where they go. It's like watching a movie, like a series of movies out of order. You know, you get all lost and confused, but God don't want you to be lost and confused. Anybody else?
It's like Pilgrim's Progress, how the Holy Spirit was so with Paul. And when John Bunyan was in prison, he wrote Pilgrim's Progress, and he was talking about, his life was just horrible. His family was in utter poverty, and he had all these children, and they were having such a hard time. His wife was just having such a hard time, and his daughter had to come every day, and she was blind. She had to bring him food, and that had to be a nightmare, and he could think of all the things that would happen to her or could happen to her as she tapped her way to prison to bring him food every day. And he could have thought about all these things and just about going crazy probably, but instead he thought about the Lord all the time. The Lord was just so precious to him and so real to him, and the prisoner said, he makes us all glad. We're so joyful because of him, being around him, because he was around the Lord. And that's the way it was with Paul. That's why he was able to rejoice so in prison.
And look at his book. It's been turned into movies. It's a very clear picture. I love the picture of the load of sin being taken off. And that's what it is. We don't realize it's that big of a load and a burden. Let me read this last verse, and I'll close this. James Peter. It's here somewhere. It's right there with be ye doers of the word. James 1:21. I won't read all the things before it, but the whole section is titled The Word. But it says, wherefore lay apart all filthiness, naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word, some may say the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. There's a lot of, but the meekness part. Receive it. Receive the word with a teachable heart, with a heart that is readily changed and readily receiving of the word, not in a because you're sitting here and you're receiving the word, but how your heart is determines what you do with it, where it goes, and everything else. So you can receive it with a hard heart and not do anything with it, but receive it with meekness, a teachable heart, and go out into the world and make disciples. That's what we're supposed to do. Okay. Everybody good? Thank you. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you've given us, Lord. We thank you for all that you've done, how everything from the beginning of time has worked together for us to be here in this moment, to come and learn something, rejoice over something, testify about something that you have done in our lives, and to tell the world that we see you at work, and to make them say, hey, I want that. I want that. I can be a part of that. Lord, help us to be what we need to be every day, every moment. And Lord, when we're not, help us to know it and change it and fix it and ask your forgiveness for it, Lord, and ask the forgiveness of others. And help us to be able to forgive others. Lord, I pray that you be with us as we leave this place. Help us to fall in love with your word every day and want more and more and more of it. It's so rich and original and life-changing. Help us to crave it and need it more and more. I just ask that you be with us in all things in Jesus' name.